Hey dreamers, welcome back to the show. This is episode 152, and it is the next part in our series entitled The Tale of Jussie Smollett's Hate Crime Hoax. If you have not listened to part 1 yet, please pause this now, go listen to episode 151, and then come back to this afterwards. I am pleasantly surprised at the interest that many of you had in this story. I understand that some of you were big fans of Empire and even pointed out that the character that Smollett portrayed was a standout favorite, which is sadly ironic based on what we will learn about the possible reasons why the staging of his hate crime occurred. We are going to start part 2 by finishing up our analysis of Smollett's interview with Robin Roberts. I want to talk a bit about his body language in the interview, and I will get into the investigative timeline, the superintendent of police, Eddie Johnson, and his press conference, as well as Johnson's career, which took a strange turn later on towards the end of 2010. And we will finish with where the case stands today. Now, if this starts to exceed an hour to an hour and a half again, and I haven't really gotten everything out there that I wanted to say, I'm most likely going to take this into a part 3, which will be out hopefully not too long after this one. I wanted to try to keep it down to 2 parts, but I'm also falling behind schedule, as usual. But at the same time, I don't want to leave anything out or rush through the things that I want to tell you. Because, Mr. Smollett, his story is a story that keeps on giving. I do want to take some time right now to thank some Patreon supporters. These are some kind individuals who joined mid to late June and have been so patient with me in getting their shout out on the show, as well as getting their perks and thank you cards mailed out. I'd like to say thank you to Rebecca O, Anissa, Andrea W, Toya O, D, Santos S, April G, who joined and raised her pledge, Jordan L for raising their pledge, Daria L for joining and raising also, and Lauren C, Kelly G, Morella C. Morella, she raised her pledge, and I hope I'm saying your name right. Mariella, Mirella, you know who you are. She has been a Patreon supporter for a while now, and she just recently bumped up her pledge, and a thank you to Devin. I will continue with the thank yous until I get all caught up in the upcoming episodes. And also, before we get into the episode, I wanted to mention on Facebook that there was some talk about how the Smollett incident had shaped and affected the city of Chicago in terms of the dueling sides of the political spectrum and how they may use what he did as a vehicle to further some sort of political agenda. Fortunately for us, this is not a political podcast. However, I do understand that the mentioning of making America great again, MAGA country, bringing up Donald Trump or anybody wearing a red baseball cap can be triggering. I know you all understand that those are facts pertaining to this story. I don't know a great deal about the political climate in the city of Chicago, but what I do know is that Chicago actually isn't really MAGA country. And if you really think about it, it's actually kind of silly calling this MAGA country as part of the narrative of this case, because it's pretty much been that for the last 100 years or more, Chicago has been a major Democratic bastion. As a matter of fact, a Republican mayor has not been elected to hold that office since 1927. So it's actually not really MAGA country, like at all. There may be a few pockets of conservatives here or there who may want to use this incident to push a political agenda. And if there are any dreamers who listen to podcasts in the political genre, and you know of any that has put out episodes about Smollett Gate, then send me links and I will add those to the conversation regarding the story and its effect on the city of Chicago. I did look around on Listen Notes to see where Smollett had been covered. And I was able to find many episodes of like daily talk show type podcasts that have maybe 5 to 10 minute segments talking about him through several episodes over time as the story evolved, because they come on every single day and put out their podcast. I don't know which way any of those shows might lean politically, because I don't listen to talk show podcasts. Sometimes the chatter just kind of bothers my ear holes, but interestingly enough, I did not really notice a crime podcast, at least one that I recognized, that ever covered this crime either, which may explain all the interest that my dreamers have expressed in the Facebook group and on other social media platforms. I have yet to find any talk of this case on any of the shows that I subscribe to, which are mostly of the crime persuasion. Maybe it does have to do with the political angle. Maybe this isn't really a thing that the left or right wants to talk about. But fortunately for you, I've been in a maelstrom of left and right and up and down for the majority of the production of the show, and I really have no idea what's going on. That being said, the chance of me saying anything that has any sort of meaningful political significance is pretty much non-existent. And if for some odd reason something came over me, and I did, if I were you, I would immediately disregard anything that I would have to say that has to do with politics as rubbish. Trust me. So why don't we get started picking up from where we last left off here in this 152nd episode of California Dreaming, the tale of Jussie Smollett's hate crime hoax. In part one, we left off discussing the rope or the noose that was wrapped around, but not wrapped around, but wrapped around Smollett's neck. You know, where he was trying to maximize the visual of that, but then he probably started to feel like a douche sack for actually utilizing one of the most disturbing symbols of racism and hate in this attack/non-attack in the story that he was spinning. Then he rolled it back in an attempt at a last-second minimization of the rope element, but then decided that he didn't want to minimize it too much because, he needed this to be as impactful of a fake story as he could make it. So he rolled back on his rollback and went back to his original rope wrapped around version. So next in Smollett's conversation with Robin Roberts, he talked about the police body cams. He said, quote, "I told him what happened, everything. I also told them to turn their body cams off because they were trying to stay in the hallway. I'm not sure why they were trying to stay in the hallway. That doesn't really sound like police to me and what they normally do, but I think that they were told in advance by dispatch that the victim was famous or well-known or something like that. So I think that the police decided to try to be cautious because as much as this could all blow up in Smollett's face, it could do very much the same for the police. This stuff could easily get out to the media with the celebrity involved, and the police are probably super aware of that. But when Smollett said that he was trying to get them to turn their body cams off, I found this to be yet another contradiction on his part. Because just a moment before, he said that he wanted them to see the rope. I wanted them to see what this was. That's what he said. So, which is it? What I think it boils down to is Smollett wants as little of this on the record as possible, meaning on video for other people to see and to look at over and over and over again and to come to their own conclusions with their own analysis. Though it could later be framed as him protecting his pride and his privacy yet again. YouTuber Linnell Harris said of this whole thing of wanting the cops to turn their body cams off was ridiculous. He said, quote, "I ain't never known a black person in America that told the police to turn their body cam off. We want all the evidence. Leave them MFers on." And I know Linnell is joking, but he's kind of got a point. To me, it's showing us it's a demonstration of how acutely aware and cognizant of everything that is going on record here on Smollett's part. That there is a strong possibility that all of this is going to come back and bite him in the butt, and he wants to minimize that as much as possible. So Smollett said he wanted them to turn the cams off, that he didn't want them in the hall when he told police, just please come in, like I don't want a big scene with my neighbors. Like with the second round of police officers, I went down to where it happened. I walked them through exactly what happened. and I looked up and I saw that there was a camera directly on the light post that was in the intersection. So I'm like, there it is. Well, dreamers, as it turned out, the camera that the alleged attack took place under was actually pointed away in another direction. So none of the fight was captured on video, which Smollett said was disappointing to him. However, investigators have said that they do believe that Smollett wanted the incident captured on video, that it was likely a part of his master plan in order for it to solidify his account of what took place. But ultimately, all of the cameras that are said to line the streets of Chicago, none of them captured the altercation between Smollett and the two attackers. None of them. Next in the interview, Robin was leading up to asking a question when she said, quote, "The vast majority of people have been supportive and loving and understanding. And then as time has gone on and it's 2:00 in the morning and you're going to Subway in sub-zero temp," and Smollett cut her off, interrupting her and becoming extremely defensive by stating, quote, "Subway's open 24 hours. Like, people kill me when they say things like that, because Subway is open for 24 hours for a reason." Now, dreamers, I've gone over how I feel about the freezing cold 2 a.m. excursion to Subway. Obviously, Smollett had a plan in mind that morning, and it was going to happen despite the temperatures, despite the late hour. Because, well, if we're being real, Smollett didn't want any other sensible human being out there, out and about, while he was trying to pull this stunt off. He didn't want anybody witnessing it. He didn't want anybody calling 911. He didn't want anybody stepping in and trying to be a hero. The streets had to be desolate in order for his plan to work. That being said, no sensible human being is trying to go out at that time to get a footlong, but Smollett needed a plausible excuse to place himself out on the street at that hour in that weather, and he chose food and smoking. Smollett continued, "Subway is open for 24 hours for a reason, so that when you're hungry at night and you ain't got no food, you go to Subway. Or it's cold and late and you call Uber Eats and have them bring the Subway to you. What about that?" Anyway, so back to the interview. Smollett pivoted again away from Subway and back to the cameras, sidestepping where Robin was headed with her line of questioning before he so rudely cut her off by stating, quote, "The camera facing north. How is that my issue?" Jeez, Smollett, this whole entire thing is your issue, and you're making it an issue for a whole mess of people too, who really have better things to do than to deal with you and your fake-ass story. And now, because I'm doing an episode on this, I'm making it everybody that listens to this issue as well. You see what you've done here? You got us all caught up in your mess. So now next, Smollett's statement. It's come up on an analysis I watched on his body language, which I'm going to talk about later on because it's really interesting. And I wanted to bring this up now because it wasn't so much about his body, but more about the way in which he said one particular statement. And it was kind of subtle, but it's one of those things that if you're looking to prove that this attack was a fabrication, then you're going to pick up on it, and it might very well be a big giveaway that lies are being told here. Smollett said, quote, "It feels like if I had said it was a Muslim or a Mexican or someone black, I feel like the doubters would have supported me a lot more." The problem that some have with the way that he worded this was that Smollett said, "if I had said it was a Muslim or a Mexican or someone black," instead of saying, "if it were a Muslim or a Mexican or someone black." The giveaway being that this is an event that Smollett quote unquote said happened rather than an event that did happen. Is this indicative of this all being a lie? Well, on its own, maybe not, but who cares? We all know it's raining lies all over the place. Like I said, it's subtle, and Smollett is a professional liar by trade, also known as an actor. Smollett may not have had our malarkey alarms going off as fast as, say, like Chris Watts did just 5 or 6 months earlier during his television interview. That being the case, we do have to look a little closer at Smollett and at the nuances of what he is saying and the way he is saying it in order to catch them all. So Smollett said, "I feel like the doubters would have supported me much more, a lot more. And that says a lot about the place we are in our country right now." So here again, he goes vague, full method Smollett, right? It's like, what place are we at that you're talking about? Where is our country right now? Expound on that. Tell us more. Details. Give us details. Then in his next sentence, I think he used a wrong word. He might have done it on purpose, but it really doesn't make much sense if that's the case. I think he just kind of mixed up his vocab. He said, quote, "The fact that we have these fear mongrels." Now, by definition, a mongrel is a mixed breed dog, but it is also a derogatory term in describing a person who is of a mixed racial background, which Smollett may have encountered something like that in his experience, being that he is biracial. I believe he meant to say fear-mongering, which by definition is the action of deliberately arousing public fear or alarm about a particular issue. And to me, that's a pretty darn bold statement coming from him, considering at the time of this interview with Robin Roberts, Smollett was less than a week away from being indicted on 4 felony counts related to the filing of a false police report. And a little bit later on, that was followed up with 12 more felony counts added, bringing his grand total of charges related to this case to 16 felony charges. I also think it's safe to say that the day before Smollett sat down for his interview with Robin on February 14th, 2019, that he had no idea that one day prior to that embarrassment, the brothers that he hired to stage the attack, their apartment was raided on the 13th. I will go through a timeline of the investigation that led to the identification of the brothers, the raid, and the evidence that was revealed that linked them to the attack and Smollett. Yeah, all that happened just the day before he spoke to Robin. I don't know if Smollett would have gone on Good Morning America if he had known. He was really pushing to do it. Robin was hesitant, but he wanted to get out there and put his story out there. He needed to stand by what he was saying. Would he have still gone if he had known that the brothers had been raided? I don't know. It's hard to say. There is no way he really could have found out either. The brothers were taken into custody and held for almost 2 days. And during that time, that fool got on Good Morning America with Robin and put on that performance. I can't call it a performance of a lifetime. Well, maybe towards the end of the thing, he dialed up the waterworks and he got super emotional. It could have been Emmy-worthy, perhaps. But again, professional liar. That's his thing. What a fool, though, right? I wonder if the cops and the Ascendario brothers were kicking it in the lounge or in the break room at the police station together, throwing a watch party to witness this train wreck that is Jussie Smollett on Good Morning America. That would have been hilarious. I would have loved to have joined that watch party. They could have streamed it or at least filmed it and then posted it on YouTube later. All of them sitting around in the police station watching Jussie Smollett on Good Morning America, lying his face off to Robin Roberts. I would have loved to have seen that. I do want to say that Smollett is the one who has perpetrated the real fear-mongering. At least he attempted to. I don't think he did it to denounce Trump or the Trump administration. I think that was a highly controversial, yet also highly convenient place for him to go with his narrative. And I say this because of what his actual motive ultimately was. It wasn't to bash Trump supporters and to give the left ammunition to work with. It was all to garner more attention for himself, to get his name out there in the mainstream media, to become more well-known and more famous, which would in turn enable him to demand more money for the upcoming sixth and final season of Empire. Empire was coming to a close, and Jussie knew that his money cow was about to go dry. He was going to try to ramp up his salary and get away with as much as he could before it was over. He knew the show was going to end. He also wanted his role to become more prominent. He wanted more pay. And the only way to do that was to use the attack as a way of bringing about more publicity and for him to have a bit of leverage when the time came to negotiate his contract. And if we're being honest, who is more divisive and more provocative than Trump or Trump supporters running around in sub-freezing Chicago at 2 a.m. to chase down Jussie Smollett of all people with a MAGA kit at the ready, red caps, rope, and bleach. And oh, by the way, the bleach, this is such a joke. The bleach was poured into an empty hot sauce bottle, and that was used to dump the bleach on Smollett. I mean, come on. How much liquid can you fit into a hot sauce bottle? Unless you bought that hot sauce bottle at Costco and got the industrial size, we're talking 10, maybe 12 ounces. I have a hot sauce bottle in my fridge. Let me go take a look. Okay, I have a bottle of Louisiana's Pure Crystal Hot Sauce. 12 ounces. And you know how they needed to be shaking that bottle to get that liquid to come out of it. Man, this is sounding more stupid the more we talk about this story. Bottle of hot sauce. Who does that? Anyway, as I was saying, Jussie Smollett is the one person here guilty of the fear-mongering. He's gay. He's black. He said that he was attacked outside his very nice apartment in a very nice neighborhood of Chicago. Now, I've never been to Chicago, and I'm sure it's like a lot of large cities where there's some places that are nice and some places that are not so nice. I looked at the area on Google Earth where his apartment was located, and yeah, it's really nice. Located near the waterfront, so there's lots of high-rises with lots of really beautiful views, I'm sure. So, his very nice apartment in a very nice neighborhood of Chicago, he's attacked by 2 white men, so he says, while all he was trying to do was get himself some food from Subway. He said they called him racial and homophobic slurs. They punched him, then they doused him in bleach, shaking it on him like they're putting hot sauce on their chicken wings or tapatio on your huevos, just sprinkling that bleach from their little bottle of Cholula hot sauce that they probably poured down the sink so they could carry out this quote-unquote attack, which was a waste of a perfectly good bottle of hot sauce if you ask me. Smollett did the fear-mongering, saying that they slipped a noose around his neck while telling him that this is MAGA country. His actions, he was attempting to incite fear and outrage. And it all may very well have ended up that way if it had really happened the way that he said it happened. For weeks, he had Chicagoans believing that there were 2 white MAGA Trump supporters lurking the icy streets at night, armed with bleach and rope, looking for black gay men in upscale neighborhoods to attack. All the while, none of it was true. This is the very definition of fear-mongering. And what makes it worse is the city of Chicago, in the years leading up to Smollett's shenanigans, the city was seeing spikes in violent crime, particularly homicides and shootings. While the numbers were steadily declining, and Chicago is far from the murder capital of the United States based on per capita statistics, the city has still been on edge because the numbers are high. The news out of Chicago that we've heard in recent months and years is that there have been often incidents involving unusually high numbers of shootings. Many homicides, not all of them, but many involve gun violence. And when we look at the statistics in recent years, in 2015, Chicago saw 493 murders. In 2016, there were 726. In 2017, there were 650. In 2018, 530. In 2019, 510. And thus far in 2020, 385. And that's an average this year of 55 murders per month. So the city, in spite of the COVID-19 pandemic, is on pace to surpass last year's statistics. What's my point? I'll tell you what my point is. Law enforcement is not pleased that so much time and resources had been diverted away from real and actual crime in order to deal with Jussie Smollett. The total cost to the city of Chicago because of Smollett has been said to have cost taxpayers upwards of $130,000. Some reports go as high as $150,000. And the tab is still running because this is not over yet. Like I said in the last episode, Smollett isn't out of hot water. So city and county and state money is still being diverted into this mess that he put into motion. I do need to say that according to the superintendent, and I may have been calling him the police chief just out of habit, but his actual title is superintendent. So Superintendent Eddie Johnson is his name, is quick to point out that no other investigation was neglected or negatively impacted as a result of Jussie Smollett's lies. That statement does have to be made with the caveat that the Chicago police are not the most trusted law enforcement agency ever. If you Google the agency, you'll find that the department has been mired in numerous controversies over the years, most prominently involving the police lying about details involving the shooting of Laquan McDonald. There was a sergeant named Xavier Elizondo, I think that's how it's said, who was sentenced to 7 years in prison for lying in order to obtain search warrants and then stealing money and drugs from those properties that he searched. He also used some of those items that he stole to give to informants that he said were the ones who alerted him to the activity going on in each of those houses that prompted the obtaining of those search warrants. And Superintendent Johnson himself has since been caught up in controversy, and I will discuss what happened to him towards the end of this story because it's generally unrelated. But for this case, Johnson did say that all was well with all other cases. They were not detracted by the Smollett incident. But still, it is possible that something went really wrong because several of the officers were elsewhere investigating things related to Smollett and not giving full attention to something more urgent. Back to the interview and this line of conversation that I had interrupted myself on, he said, "We have these fear mongrels, these people that are trying to separate us, and it's just not okay. And for all of the people, the next time you see someone reporting something, maybe after the fact that it happened, and you say to them, well, why are you waiting till now? Just remember that mine was reported right away. And look what happened." And to me, dreamers, this whole statement is also vague as well as irrelevant. Nobody is talking to him about not reporting the incident right away. So again, he's trying to divert attention from what Robin was trying to ask originally, which was people taking issue with him going to Subway at 2 a.m. in freezing cold weather. Robin next went to another interesting and telling aspect of Smollett's story. His cell phone. She asked, quote, "The phone. As you said, it was an accurate account of the timeline. Valuable information. When did you make that information available to police?" Smollett answered, "We had to give the phone records, which they did not originally ask for my phone records. They asked for my phone. They wanted me to give my phone to the tech for 3 to 4 hours. I'm sorry, but I'm not going to do that." Okay, so right away we're going to find this suspicious because Smollett is supposedly the victim here, correct? He was not a suspect at that point, at least not completely. Things may have been headed in that direction if his phone had been able to provide the police with a timeline and prove his story was valid. Then you'd want to get that to them right away, wouldn't you? Smollett continued, quote, "Because I have my private pictures and videos and numbers, my partner's number, my family's numbers, my castmates' numbers, my friends' numbers, my private emails, my private songs, my private voice memos. I don't know what that is going to be to hand my phone over, and honestly, by then, inaccurate and false statements had already been put out there." It's not a stretch to assume that Smollett likely erased things that may have been important pieces of evidence, possibly incriminating evidence. Incriminating for Smollett, that is. Because don't forget, he carried out this planned attack with no intentions of police ever getting involved. He never thought he was going to be investigated, so it's not like he took any effort to cover up the evidence of the planning. So the interview with Robin took place on Thursday, February 14th, a little more than 2 weeks after the attack. It's been reported that Smollett turned the phone records over earlier that same week of the interview, but he only turned over a total of 1 hour of records prior to the attack. What that means is if the attack took place at 2 a.m., he provided call and text records that covered the hour between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. And according to Chicago PD, the records that he turned over were extremely limited and heavily redacted, which is cop speak for, essentially, garbage. They said that at the time they were going to need more information to corroborate the timeline of events that Smollett had provided leading up to the time of the attack. His attorney said that they would be cooperating fully with the police investigation. So, whatever that means. Smollett told Robin that the inaccurate and false information was what really bothered him. She asked what claims were being made, and he said that the claim that he described the attackers wearing MAGA hats was untrue, that he never said that. I don't know if Smollett ever said that these guys had MAGA hats on, but we did find out later that the Osundario brothers did attempt to purchase MAGA hats, but they were not able to do so, because when they asked, the guy said, "We don't sell those." So they bought red baseball caps instead. Of this, Smollett said, "I don't need to add anything like that. They called me a racial slur, the N-word. They called me a homophobic slur, the F-word. There's no which way you cut it. I don't need some MAGA hat as the cherry on top of some racist sundae." Also, dreamers, if you have seen this interview, or if you go and watch it, this whole segment about the MAGA hat being the cherry on top of the sundae Smollett is dishing up here, he's smiling through it all, and even one point he's laughing because, being the victim of a quote-unquote modern-day lynching is hilarious. In regards to the false information that he referenced, he also said, quote, "I've heard that this whole thing was a date gone bad, which I so resent that narrative. I'm not going to go out and get a tuna sandwich and a salad to meet somebody. That's ridiculous and offensive. Aside from that, it's offensive," and you already said offensive, but okay, "and it's bull, and it's unfair. It's unfair to the investigation. It's unfair to, and I hate to say this word, but it's unfair to the victim." Smollett may hate the word victim, but if he had said survivor, I'd have lost it. And yes, he is referring to himself in the third person. He continued, "Yes, there's Grindr. Yes, there's Jacked. And I'm assuming that those are dating apps or something. I've heard of Grindr. I've never heard of Jacked. There's all of these things I haven't been on in years. I can admit that I was on them back in the day. I was single. You know what I'm saying? I haven't been on that in years." Again, he's off topic and totally trying to divert attention away from the question at hand, but okay. Robin, over that conversation, like the rest of us, said, "What were your injuries?" And Smollett answered, "It was reported that I had fractured ribs or cracked ribs. That wasn't true. I was just in a lot of pain. My clavicle was messed up. My rib was bruised, but nothing was cracked. I walked into the hospital and I walked out of the hospital." Robin next asked, "Why do you think you were targeted?" Dreamers, the way Smollett answered this question is one of the cringiest things and one of the things that bothers me most about this whole entire interview. Of all the things that he said, this stood out to me. He answered, "I can only assume, I come really hard against 45. Really, really hard against 45, he said. And he's smiling and saying this entire sentence really creepily in a really creepy voice. And in case you forgot or don't care, 45 is code speak for Trump. "I come really, really hard against his administration and I don't hold my tongue." One of the biggest reasons I took issue with this goes back to the people that we are talking about here. Smollett is saying that this attack was carried out by two racist, Trump-supporting homophobes that also happen to be fans of Empire, a show with the main cast comprised entirely of African Americans, successful African Americans being portrayed on TV, and took the time to become so familiar with Jussie Smollett and followed him on social media so that they knew that Smollett apparently openly speaks disparagingly about Trump, which is also questionable, to a point that it enrages these two men so much that they go and find out where he lives, they find out where he works, they try to send a death threat to his work, and then follow that up by coincidentally encountering him as he went out into the freezing weather at 2 a.m. to go get Subway, and they happen to have their MAGA hate kit crime complete with some cheap, poor excuse for rope, a hot sauce bottle filled with bleach, and oh, by the way, I googled the hot sauce bottle, which was recovered at the scene, by the way. It was only 8 ounces. 8 ounces of El Yucateco Salsa Picante de Chile Habanero. Yeah. They had all of that with them, ready to exact revenge on Smollett for being publicly critical of President Trump, attacking Smollett for maybe 30 to 45 seconds, and then running away, leaving nothing but some string hanging from Smollett's neck, a few droplets of bleach on his white sweater, and a small boo-boo on his cheek. All of that because Smollett is outspoken about Trump. Okay. Then Robin's interview cuts to a news clip of Trump being asked about Smollett. Trump answered, "I think it's horrible. It doesn't get any worse as far as I'm concerned." Robin asked Smollett, "Were you aware that he made that statement?" And Smollett answered, "I saw it. I don't know what to say about it, you know. I appreciate him not brushing over it." Robin next asked, "Is there any doubt in your mind what motivated this attack?" And he answered, "I can only go off of their words. I mean, who says effing empire, N-word, this MAGA country?" And Dreamers, the F word may have been the F word or a homophobic slur. I'm not sure which one. I believe both were said to him in some capacity, according to Smollett, or in his own mind they were said to him during the course of this supposed attack. But he continued, "Who ties a noose around your neck and pours bleach on you? And this is just a friendly fight? I will never be that man that this did not happen to. I am forever changed. And I don't subscribe to the idea that everything happens for a reason. But I do subscribe to the idea that we have the right and responsibility to make something meaningful out of the things that happen to us, good and bad." Robin next asked, "What do you feel people need to hear the most from this story?" And Smollett said, "I think what people need to hear is the truth. Just the truth, because everybody has their own idea. Some are healing and some are hateful. But I just want young people, young members of the LGBTQ community, young Black children to know how strong they are, to know the power that they hold in their little pinky." And Robin Roberts stated that the attack 2 weeks ago at the time of this interview left Smollett bruised but not broken. And she next asked him, "Have you ever been attacked before?" And Smollett said, "Yeah, I get threatened all the time on Twitter and Instagram and DMs and things like that, you know. I'm a public figure. I'm very outspoken. Sometimes maybe too outspoken, but it's who I am, you know, so I get the idea of pissing people off." I want to talk a little bit about the few of the things that were said here in this last segment of the interview about the motivation for the attack. I looked around and there doesn't seem to be a list or a compilation of tweets from Smollett where he goes hard against Trump, nor has he historically been a frequent critic of him, at least on social media. Lots of celebrities speak often and openly on social media against Trump. Some of them even get blocked by him. It should be noted that the last tweet from Jussie Smollett was sent on January 28, 2019, the day before the attack, and it was a retweet of a poster for a show that he was appearing at on February 2nd, 2019 at the Troubadour in West Hollywood. The comments below his final tweet, they were harsh, and that goes without saying. Also, another mistake that I think Jussie made was that there were just too many props involved in this attack, if you know what I'm talking about. He used too many elements to send a message that he was being attacked for everything under the sun, for being gay, for being black, and for being anti-Trump. The noose, the bleach, the red hats, the slurs, the MAGA country statement, the letter from a week before with a drawing of him hanging from a tree. Jussie Smollett needs a lesson in what a hate crime looks like. And here, I'll give it to him in 3 words. James Byrd Jr. That is a hate crime. It is not a piece of string placed over your head like a sash on a pageant contestant. It's a chain wrapped around your ankles and hooked up to the back bumper of a pickup truck. It's not having 8 ounces of bleach sprinkled on you from a condiment bottle. It's being urinated and defecated on by 3 white supremacists. It's not receiving a boo-boo the size of a paper cut on your cheek. It's getting pummeled and kicked about the head, face, body, and groin as you crumple to the ground and writhe in pain. This is not happening in Smollett's neighborhood on the affluent streets of Chicago amongst the shiny high-rises and skyscrapers in the middle of a freezing cold night in January. It's happening on the dirt roads in the backwoods of small-town Jasper, Texas, on a balmy summer night, where one would likely encounter someone heading home from a party walking off the beers that he had. And you're not going to walk into a hospital on your own with injuries that are borderline laughable. Your torso is going to be scraped off the road and scooped into a body bag while others are searching for where your head, neck, and arm may have ended up. That, my friend, is a hate crime. James Byrd Jr. was a victim of a crime of opportunity. You, Jussie Smollett, are the perpetrator of a crime for an opportunity. Robin next asked, "Do you think that there is a link between the letter and the attack? You mentioned it to the police right away," and Smollett said, "Absolutely. Just because on the letter had a stick figure hanging from a tree with a gun pointing towards it, with the words that said, 'Jussie Smollett, you will die black,' and then it was followed by a homophobic slur. There was no address, but the return address was in big red, like caps, MAGA. Did I make that up too?" Well, do you really want an answer to that question, Jussie Smollett? Robin Roberts said that Smollett had hopes of rewriting the narrative about that night, saying that he fought back against his attackers. He said, "I wanted to find the video surveillance of the attack so badly, probably because of 4 reasons. Number 1, I wanted them to find the people that did it. Number 2, I wanted them to stop being able to say alleged attack. Number 3, I wanted them to see that I fought back." Smollett paused for a moment, and he became quite emotional again and continued, "I want the little gay boy who might watch this to see that I fought back. And it doesn't take anything away from the people who are not able to do that. But I fought back. They ran off. I didn't." Robin asked, "What do you say to the young gay person?" And Smollett said, "To learn to fight. And I just don't mean learn to fight," and he motioned with his hands like fisticuffs. "I mean learn to fight. Be a fighter. I'm not advocating for violence at all. Let's be clear about that. But if you're gonna die, fight until you do. Because if you don't fight, you will have no chance. I have fought for love. I am an advocate. I respect too much the people who I am now one of these people who have been attacked in any way." And here comes my most favorite line of this whole entire thing. "You do such a disservice when you lie about stuff like this." at least Jussie Smollett is aware of that. Now he just has to own it. Robin asked her final question. If the attackers are never found, how will you be able to heal? Smollett was silent for a few moments, thinking about his answer, I suppose. He became very emotional again. He teared up more than in any part of this interview and said, I don't know. Let's just hope that they are. And he's pretty much openly sobbing at this point. You know what I'm saying? Let's not go there yet. I was talking to a friend and she said, sweetie, they're not going to find them. And that just made me so angry because I'm just going to be left here with this. You know what I'm saying? I'm just going to be left here with they go free and go on about their lives and possibly attack someone else. And I'm here left with that. The aftermath of this bull. That's not cool to me. That's not okay. So I understand how difficult it will be to find them, but we gotta. I still want to believe with everything that has happened, there's something called justice. Because if I stop believing that, then what's it all for? Clearly, Smollett did not know his so-called attackers had already been identified and were in police custody at the time he gave this sit-down talk with Robin Roberts. And that is where the interview ended. I was going to talk about the body language next, but I think I want to wait until later because we spent a great deal of time picking apart the things that Jussie Smollett said in the interview and how incredulous everything sounded. I wanted to tell you about the police investigation that was launched following the attack and how it was police became aware of the Osundario brothers. Investigators went to look at the surveillance videos that were taken the night of the attacks. Smollett himself had pointed out the camera that may have captured the attack itself, which was pointed in another direction and didn't capture anything. Investigators did find two people that they identified as persons of interest involved in the attack, and they did indeed strongly believe that these two men in those images were the ones involved. They pulled those images out and sent out an alert to the community that they were seeking to identify the two people in the picture. Police began canvassing the area, searching for witnesses, as well as more cameras, both public and private, that may have captured more footage of the men in question. They spoke to about 100 potential witnesses in and around the area of the attack. In addition to that, they found 35 of the city's own cameras that had captured footage of the two men and 20 private sector cameras that also captured images or footage of them as well. The Chicago police credited the citizens of the city of Chicago who stepped up in helping them pull together the video evidence, which turned out to be extremely useful to the investigation. It essentially provided the most accurate timeline of the movements and locations of the two persons of interest throughout that night. So first, the investigators tracked the two men as they moved on and traveled after the attack. They were tracked fleeing from the scene, and they were able to follow them in the direction where they headed through the camera images and were able to see them getting into a taxi. Because of the surveillance, police were able to track that taxi down and the taxi driver, and that taxi driver was subsequently interviewed. And in addition, he had a dash cam in his video that recorded the entire ride. If you've seen this video from the taxi cab, it looks like the Osundario brothers were wearing all white outfits, but that is not what they were wearing. They were wearing all black outfits. This camera was one that was giving you the reverse images like a night vision camera. So it was sort of like the negative image, because if they were wearing all black and it was nighttime, you wouldn't be able to see them very well. So investigators used all of the cameras along the city streets to follow this taxi where it was going to take the two men. The taxi took them to the north side of Chicago, where the taxi eventually pulled over and the two men got out. And from here, private cameras proved useful in tracking where they went from there. Then the investigators began looking at video footage from the time the attack took place and going backwards in time to see where the men had come from leading up to the attack. They viewed surveillance footage of the two men walking around and worked their way back to the point where they had gotten out of another cab in the area where Smollett's residence was located. They were able to track down that cab and its driver, whom they also interviewed. That cab was tracked backwards by way of video footage as it traveled to where it dropped the two men off. It was tracked all the way back to another vehicle that they took a ride in, which was a rideshare, either an Uber or a Lyft. They investigated the rideshare, and of course, as you know, if you've taken an Uber or a Lyft, all of that is handled through your cell phone apps, which is very, very easily tracked to the person who ordered the rideshare. This not only gave investigators a near exact timeline of what the two men were up to leading up to the attack, but also positively identified them as to who they were. When investigators continued to track the movements of the Osundario brothers in the time following the attack, they were eventually tracked all the way to Chicago's O'Hare Airport, where they both boarded a plane to Nigeria. The investigation revealed that the plane tickets that they had purchased were round trip, and they were coming back to Chicago on February 13th, the day before the Smollett interview with Robin Roberts. So for those 2 weeks while the brothers were in Nigeria, police pressed on with their investigation to try and piece together what exactly it was that they were looking at here, and what exactly happened the night of the attack. And that included as many as 50 search warrants and subpoenas for phone records, social media accounts, and background information and records on various people who may have been closely involved with Smollett at the time, in order to assist the investigation to try and figure out what the real facts and information of this case actually was. What was also recovered during the course of this investigation was a very sharp and clear video surveillance image of the two brothers purchasing their MAGA kit at some store. They were getting the rope, and they were getting, I think, some ski masks and possibly 2 red baseball caps. It's just ridiculous. And they paid with a $100 bill. I think I mentioned that earlier. And they got that $100 bill from Jussie Smollett. So on February 13th, 2019, the Chicago police, along with the FBI, customs agents, and officers who work at Chicago's O'Hare Airport, together they were able to mobilize at the airport. They were able to locate and identify the Osundario brothers as they flew back into the United States and made their way through customs. They were arrested on the spot. They were Mirandized, and they both immediately requested to speak to their attorney. So they were brought into police headquarters to be booked into the county jail. While they were being processed, their attorney showed up and consulted with the brothers. After speaking with the Osundario brothers for a little while, their attorney came out and talked to investigators, and she said that something just wasn't right about this case, and that it was her strong belief that her clients were not the offenders, they were not the attackers, as the police had been stating that they were. Eventually, she got her clients and investigators to a point where they were going to be willing to talk about what they knew, and it took nearly 2 days for them to reach that point. The brothers' attorney told police that she was going to allow her clients to be interviewed by them, that it would be videotaped, and the attorneys would be present, and that they needed to hear and listen to what the brothers had to say. Then their attorneys asserted that their clients were not offenders, they were in fact victims themselves. And this was the point into the investigation, into the attack on Jussie Smollett, when it began to head into a completely different direction. Based on the information that the Osundario brothers provided to police in this interview, they were able to corroborate the timeline that they provided with the timeline that the police had put together, as well as many of the details of the case. In other words, the things that the Osundario brothers were saying, the police believed to be true, and they believed it could be proven. The brothers were held in custody for about 47 hours. And at the 48th hour, they were either going to have to be charged with the crime or they were going to have to be released. But by that hour, police were satisfied that not only were they telling the truth, but their story had been substantiated by witness statements and video surveillance, and they also, technically, the brothers did not commit any crime. It is not illegal to be paid to help somebody stage a hoax. It is illegal to report said hoax to law enforcement, which sounds simple on the surface, but clearly the DA was able to squeeze 16 felonies out of the making of this false police report. We know, however, that 16 felonies is usually a way to get a criminal defendant to decide to plead to something lesser, at which time many of those charges are going to be dropped and the sentence is much, much less. Whereas if the dice are rolled on going to trial, a conviction could lead to some significant jail time. And I believe Smollett is looking at as many as 3 years in prison. For a guy who's willing to throw his own brother's good name under the bus in order to get out of a DUI, you know this guy is not even wanting to go to jail for a night to sleep one off, much less 3 years. So back to the brothers. If they were not going to cooperate with police, I'm sure that they were being threatened all up and down the police interrogation room with criminal charges related to the staged attack. Things like lying to police, obstruction of justice, conspiracy, yada, yada, yada. I don't know how much or how little that they were communicating with Smollett after the fact. I've heard that they've talked to him while they were in Nigeria. I don't know how much they were saying. I don't even know what the brothers knew or if they were even identified or looked at themselves. But I think it's safe to say that they probably didn't talk all that much. And nobody knew, not Smollett, not the Asandario brothers, nobody knew how close the police were getting, especially since they had spent those 2 weeks in Nigeria. Smollett knows that the police have at least one camera image of the men walking around the sidewalk near the location of the attack at the time that it took place. He identified them as being his attackers. How dumb is this guy to think that with all the cameras all over Chicago, cameras all over nearly every business, every building, and many, many homes these days, that the grainy, dark image of these two men would be the only images that police would be able to find of them that night, leading up to the attack and subsequent to the attack. They didn't just magically appear on the scene and then poof, we're gone. They had to get there somehow. Smollett must have known that these guys were traveling by taxi and rideshare and that everything had cameras. But he was the one that identified them. Police would have been none the wiser if he wasn't like, oh yeah, that's them. That looks just like them. He was the one. Thinking that one picture was so vague and so nondescript and that the police were so incompetent that they would never be able to piece it together. So stupid and ignorant. I mean, okay, Smollett should not have attempted to pull something like this off in the first place. He probably thought it was a victimless crime. His only thought was to benefit from the publicity of such a hate-filled attack, and that's all he wanted. He wanted to garner that attention for himself. And what if he was never found out? What if we never found out that the attack was fake? What if Smollett had insisted to his creative director, forced him to put the phone down, do not call police, and Frank agreed? What if Smollett was able to frame the story the way he wanted to, and the police never got involved, the brothers got their money, and no harm was done to anyone? The police were never bothered with having any part of this to investigate. Would that have been the preferable outcome? Jussie Smollett would have gotten his little moment in the spotlight. He would have been able to spin the narrative of being the hero for the Black community, the LGBTQ community, and those who are unhappy with the current state of politics in the United States. He'd be their hero too. Jussie Smollett fighting back against the racism and the bigotry and an unpopular presidential administration. Yay, Jussie. Along with that comes a tidal wave of loving and caring messages from around the world. Steve Harvey called him Little Brother Jussie. that he had him. He had his back. From celebrities to public figures to athletes to politicians, everyone had Jussie. And we could have been none the wiser. No harm, no foul. I would not have preferred that outcome. As much as Smollett hurt the communities that he wanted to try and represent and stand up for, I think it's better to know the truth than to have some shyster masquerading as a social justice warrior who fought back and won. The next step was to convene the grand jury and present the evidence that they had to see if there was enough to move forward with charges against Jussie Smollett. And the Osundario brothers were going to be called to testify as to their role in the staged attack. So the brothers were in custody from Wednesday, February 13th to Friday, February 15th. And then the weekend passed, and Monday the 18th was a holiday. I believe maybe President's Day or something like that. So the appointment for the grand jury was made for Tuesday, February 19th, 2019. However, Smollett's attorney called the DA's office and said that they had some evidence that they needed to come forward with, and this appeared to be an attempt to postpone the grand jury hearing. Smollett and his attorneys met with investigators and the prosecutor, but when all was said and done, nothing new was provided to them in the way of evidence. It did turn out to be a stalling tactic. Just more fake stuff, more lies. And I seriously wonder if Smollett and his team were attempting to somehow get the prosecution's office to drop their entire investigation, or at least the police. I wouldn't put anything past Smollett and his willingness to do anything to try and wiggle his way out of trouble. And in this case, in order to do that, in order for Smollett to not be guilty of this, the Osundario brothers need to be guilty. He needs them to take the fall for this. He needs them to admit that they attacked him. He needs them to be charged, tried, and convicted. He needs them to go to jail in order for him to walk free and continue with this narrative. Do you think these brothers are going to go down for Jussie Smollett? I seriously doubt it. And even if they started to try to, if maybe somehow Smollett was able to bribe them or something, they may even face more charges because we all know they'd be lying if they did. Smollett's attorney's attempts to postpone the inevitable didn't work, and with that, the appointment with the grand jury moved forward and the charges were brought up against Smollett. The following day, he surrendered himself into custody, charged with filing a false police report and disorderly conduct. It was later that same day that Chicago police gave a press conference about the case and provided the details about how the assault was staged and how they said that Smollett did it as a publicity stunt, that he was unsatisfied with his Empire salary, which amounted to about $1 million a year, which would be awesome for any of us, right? But when, say, like actors such as Norman Reedus of The Walking Dead, Elizabeth Moss of The Handmaid's Tale, or Nicole Kidman of Big Little Lies are all getting $1 million an episode, Smollett probably feels like he's making chump change. I believe Terrence Howard was being paid somewhere in the ballpark of $250,000 per episode. It was also alleged that Smollett decided to enlist the help of the brothers to stage the attack because the threatening letter that he received from himself did not garner as much attention as he had hoped, and that he intentionally made this attack about racism and the Trump administration to elicit anger from the public and groups who identified with him. Smollett's bail was set at $100,000, and he was released that same day after he had posted bond. Okay, I am going to end part 2 here. We will continue with the story, picking up with the press conference regarding Smollett's arrest, the investigation, and then the charges being dropped just a couple of weeks after Smollett was arraigned in some sort of shady back alley deal with state prosecutors and Smollett's attorneys. We will get to what's going on with the case today and some of the key players involved and some of the turns that their careers have taken. So stay tuned. Part 3 will be out shortly. And until then, my dreamers, stay safe out there and sweet dreams.